Hi, I'm Randall.
And I'm Matt, here with No Market Media. Now today Randall and I are going to do something a little bit different because
Wait a minute.
it's kind of special.
Wait a minute. Today's not Monday.
It's not Thursday either.
So what's so special?
Well, we're celebrating the 20th anniversary on today of the release of The Lord of the Rings, The Fellowship of the Ring.
Ooh, that is special. Roll the intro. December 19th, 2001. An otherwise innocuous date in any other year marked a really big turning point for us here at No Market Media. Near the completion of the first half of our sophomore year, the genre-defining and genre-smashing movie The Lord of the Rings, The Fellowship of the Ring was being released to theaters. It is almost unbelievable, but The Fellowship of the Ring is celebrating its 20th anniversary. And we wanted to do something just a little bit different to commemorate this occasion.
For many of our longtime viewers, it may seem strange, considering that we mostly talk about nerdy and geeky forms of media, but we hardly ever reference The Lord of the Rings. It seems that The Lord of the Rings is almost so unique a story and set of films that it almost stands alone, even given the vast array of genres it represents.
Yeah, there's clearly a heavy amount of fantasy in the story, but it seamlessly crosses over into action, drama, adventure, romance, politics, religion, and, even some slight trappings of science fiction. The Lord of the Rings trilogy is so outside the bounds of most regular films that it's often hard to use it as a point of comparison, except against the trio of Hobbit films. But we're not going to get into those just now.
Now, since the Fellowship of the Ring specifically is celebrating its 20th anniversary, we're both big fans of the movies. We wanted to give this film some extra attention. So what exactly does that mean? There is no shortage of conversations surrounding the stories of Middle-earth, and The Lord of the Rings in particular. So why watch our version? It's our intention to actually talk primarily about the movie.
That's right. We looked over the Lord of the Rings landscape, and there is no shortage of conversations regarding the making of the films, behind-the-scenes commentary, or the Tolkienverse at large. What we also saw was a lack of people just talking about the films. Obviously, those conversations are happening somewhere, but too often they evolve into talking about the universe as a whole. We want to really dig into our love of this movie. And while we might mention some behind-the-scenes stuff, it's not where we're going to spend the bulk of our conversation during this special.
So, without further ado, please enjoy this long overdue conversation concerning hobbits and the Fellowship of the Ring.
All right, Matt, I'm going to start with you, to your recollection. We usually do retrospective as how we view the film now, but right now, what do you remember were your first impressions of Lord of the Rings, The Fellowship of the Ring?
So actually, my more vivid, recollections aren't actually of the first time I watched the movie, but actually the first time I saw a trailer for the movie. So I was in the movie theater with a friend of ours, and the trailer came up. And he immediately got excited and was like, is this The Lord of the Rings? And me thinking, I had never read the books. I really didn't know much of anything of Lord of the Rings. Maybe, a little bit of the Hobbit animated movie or, stuff like that. Lord of the Rings animated movie stuff. I really didn't know it, didn't watch it. So to me, I'm like, what's this Lord of the Rings thing? And why is my buddy so excited? But I know just from that trailer, just, the visuals and of, kind of that fantasy element and stuff, I was already a bit excited just, feeding off of my friends' excitement too and stuff. So that was my first foray and got me first excited into The Lord of the Rings.
Not to mention the music was probably pretty awesome.
Yeah.
A whole bunch of stuff about the music.
Honestly, I don't even think the music was actually the same music that's in the movie. I think it was, some I mean, I could be wrong, but think it might have been just some like generic, like trailer music that was playing on at the time.
So what's important for me to remember about the first time I watched it is I didn't know anything about the Tolkien verse. And I had really only just like dipped my toes into like The Hobbit and stuff, like barely. But the first impression that I had, really what surprises me is like the grand scale of everything. And even back then, I loved like large, diverse, awesome casts. Because I had never seen a movie with this kind of scale. Like 2000 Gladiator comes out, but it doesn't have this super expansive scale. And all of these plot lines, everything going everywhere. Like, really, when I say that it's unique, name another movie, especially around the time that this one came out, where there's just so much going on, so many characters, and so, that you can so invest yourself into, that you can just dive into. Remember, Game of Thrones hasn't come out yet. That kind of stuff hadn't happened. Lord of the Rings comes out, and it's like, wow, I've never seen this before.
Me, I think a lot of things, too, is I think it took kind of like a genre, kind of like fantasy, and made it appeal to such a wide audience.
Yeah.
There was things like, I don't want to say like underground, but there's always like groups like you'd think more for like us, like geeky, nerdy folk. They're in more into like wizards and stuff and different things. But this movie presents those themes and stuff in such a way that I think it really, is universal. Maybe it's part of kind of like, the story and different stuff too, but kind of how you're talking about too, there's a lot of it of what they show, and then, the realization that there is a bigger like world that this is a part of.
Yeah.
And I think that's what really interests me about this first movie. Like, we get glimpses of different things, but there's so much more to this. And I think that's what really gripped me about this movie and why it stands out.
Yeah, like I said, nothing else like it. So you see that the very first time, you're just like, that's awesome. I'm going to sit down and I'm going to invest my life into this. Some people have entire YouTube channels dedicated to literally just Tolkien stuff.
It was interesting too, because there was a lot of like build up for like this movie's release. I mean, granted, a lot of people were excited, like my friend at the movie theater who, saw the trailer, knew what this was, and me as someone didn't. So all I could do was see like this build up and stuff, but I wasn't disappointed at all when it came out. It was so much bigger than that.
It got the general movie public invested in it. And then you get, a whole bunch of like weird offshoots, or hey, if they can do it, then we can make a Dragon Quest movie or something like that. If they can do it, we can make our fantasy film. Nah, you missed the point. But that gets me to the next point I was going to make about like what my first impressions. Characters, plots. I mean, there's been some big cast movies that have come out before this, but you add it in with all of that like grand scheme and that grand plan and everything that's going on, and then you roll it into this movie where all of these characters all have their individual, like, this is what's going on with Boromir, this is what's going on with Aragorn, this is what's going on with Gollum, this is what's going on with Frodo and everything. They all feel different. They all feel fresh. They all have an important role to play. None of them are really throwaway characters. And you add that in with this awesome story, and I'm game. Those were my first impressions. Like, wow, that's awesome.
Another thing too is this is something that's kind of reserved with like Star Wars a little bit as well. But with like Lord of the Rings, it was another one of those movies where it was like an event. It's someone that you actually like take your whole family, all your friends, whatever, to go see, during the holidays. I mean, December 19th or whatever, it's, right before Christmas and stuff. And like I said, those are like the two genres that I really know, that I've really experienced, is like Star Wars and Lord of the Rings. And it's this first one of the Lord of the Rings that really helped build it on, because that's really what, we're talking about. This one, it really was, a movie event. That's one thing I really like about some movies that aren't just, I like, just a normal good movie to watch. But there's also something, too, about having, like, an event movie. And I think that's really, one of my first impressions of this movie.
The only event movies we get nowadays, it's not bad. Marvel's earned their due, but it's one superhero movie after the next superhero movie after the next superhero movie. And I'm just like, that's our tentpole movies right now. And again, well deserved for the MCU and doing what they did. but to just come fresh on the scene and just blow everyone away like Lord of the Rings did, that was awesome. And key here, since we're talking about specifically Fellowship, it's a standalone movie. It has a beginning. It's a 3-act structure, beginning, middle, and end. This movie is its own thing. Even though it stands as part of a trilogy, it is its own thing, and I love that.
Yeah, and this movie definitely, ends though with, setting up other stuff too. But as we were kind of saying, it does establish a lot in this movie and stuff too. There's enough, like you were talking about with the characters and storytelling and stuff through this, that, encompassing in this one film, that it's good. It was a great way to, start off, this series to, I think for probably people that are already well aware of the source material and, people like me who was just getting into it. This was the introduction to this great world.
Yeah. Now I'll give you it's not really a spoiler warning, but I mean it is more of a, when we're talking about Lord of the Rings, we are mostly talking about the extended edition. So like the theatrical edition could leave some things out for fans where you're just like, I remember having a conversation, although we're not talking about the Two Towers, with my wife, and I'm like, yeah, Aragorn, he's like 76 years old. She goes, what are you talking about? I'm like, it's right in the movie.
You cannot be 80.
87.
Because I'm like, I've only ever seen that one in theaters once.
Right. Yep.
And I've only ever watched the extended edition since. And it's exactly the same with Fellowship. I've only ever seen the theatrical version once.
And I'm one of those people that I have bought the film, 3-4 times. I've bought it when it's on DVD, bought it when it's on Blu-ray, bought it when it's on 4K or whatever. And yeah, I agree with you. Other than like seeing it in the theaters or whatever, yeah, it's up there in the frame. I don't know if you can see. The 4K is the newest one. But yeah, every time, other than watching it in the theaters, I've watched the extended version. Yeah. But from what I remember of like the theatrical version, I think probably the Fellowship is probably the one that has maybe the least added that's really pivotal to the plot and stuff. I don't know. I could be wrong on that one, but from my recollection, I don't know that, that you absolutely need the extended stuff. But it's nice to watch, and that's what I always watch.
That's what I always watch.
So, generally, it's kind of a pretty simple story, I guess, premise. There's this bad guy, and he's got this magical thing that helps him kind of like control and makes him powerful.
But does he do bad things?
I mean, yeah, he does bad things. I mean, he's trying to control the world and everything. And basically, it's a story about, long time ago, people got together and got rid of this bad guy. We thought we did. But, that powerful thing's still around. So as long as that powerful thing's around, he's always going to be a threat. So now we got to get a bunch of other people that are from different backgrounds, different things, to put their differences aside to try to go on this quest to get rid of this bad thing so that the ultimate bad guy doesn't come back.
Okay, but this goes to a point that I have made many times on our channel, so everyone knows what I'm going to say. Simple premise. And then see what happens.
Yep.
It's a simple premise. It's just like, all right, ultimate weapon, the ring, and it's kind of tied in with this bad guy, this guy that is no one really knows is as powerful as he is. He's being very sneaky about it, But it's just such an easy to grasp on. Here's the good guys. Here's the bad guys. The ring can corrupt them. But somehow, hobbits are so simple and so, level-headed and close to the earth that they are less corruptible. They are more, attuned to nature, basically, kind of. And then you just add in some wizards and some sword play and see where things go. It's not a complicated story. There's a lot of plots and there's a lot of like things going on between characters that gets later done, but the Fellowship of the Ring, the very first one, good guys set off on quest to destroy bad ring. Stop Sauron.
What I like about it too is because it's all like, you know, like different people like coming together, different backgrounds. I mean, and you know, they're coming together with this common goal, and like you said, a lot of them are all tempted to take, you know, the ring and everything. And there's danger around them, you know, at like every turn. Like people that they run into could also cause it to splinter stuff too. So yeah, it is kind of like that simple, you know, premise. It's simple enough, but we go into detail about different things to kind of like expand it out and make it a, you know, an enjoyable story.
And an enjoyable movie.
An enjoyable movie.
Because you never know, like, when someone's trustworthy or not trustworthy, basically. And you also get that, like, really early, the Council of Eldaron. I say real early, it's like 40 minutes into the film. Relatively early to the runtime of the movie, where you get Legolas and, you know, Gimli, and it's like, I don't trust elves, and, you know, and Gimli's all like, well, I don't trust dwarves, basically, and, you know, Gandalf has a headache, and he's like, oh, this is going great, isn't it? You know, you get all of that. And then you get, you know, the Hobbit, the Frodo's like, I'll do it. Basically. All of this chaos is breaking out with between these characters and everything. You don't know who you can trust. And it's the same, like you said, with any stranger they meet. And then it's like, well, okay, the one person that we know is, you know, not uncorruptible, but is less influenced, hobbits. And Frodo offers to take the ring. So.
Well, because I think that's a big point too, is like everyone wants the ring to kind of like do something with it. And like Frodo is the one that like reluctantly takes the job. Because he sees that, you know, the ring is going to destroy them all. So he is, you know, he was happy to get rid of the ring.
Yeah.
A lot of times he tried to hand off the ring, you know, to different people and stuff. It's not a burden that he wants to bear, but it's kind of like called to. And, you know, that's a good thing that we, you know, we've seen a lot of good stories, and it's, you know, very evident in this as well.
Yeah, definitely. Simple story. That's how it's done. Move along. So, since we're talking about characters, you know, Frodo's an interesting character because, like, it's not that his character's not in, you know, himself deep, but all the other characters have a lot more to them, it seems. Now, the Bagginses have backstory. There's Bilbo, and there's the whole Hobbit stuff that happened before that. But Frodo's character, at least in the context of the movies, kind of that character that a general moviegoer can latch onto. You know, the protagonist that I'm, you know, going to latch onto, the fish out of the water kind of character. And I guess there's an argument for Merry and Pippin, too. Because all these other characters that are, you know, Gandalf and Aragorn and Legolas, Gimli, they all know so much. But the hobbits don't. They really don't. They don't concern themselves with what's going on. So those characters are interesting for us viewers to latch onto and get to know this world through their eyes, because even though they live in it, they don't know that much outside of, you know, Hobbiton, the Shire.
What I think my general thing is about the characters in this one is I think they're fun. This is a fun movie to watch. And, you know, sometimes when you have fun characters, it can get to the point of annoying. It doesn't go that far. To me, it doesn't. I don't find any of these characters really annoying and stuff. And, you know, we do have serious moments with our characters. But, you know, kind of, you're talking about other parts, kind of like, we get more of it in later movies. But, you know, like the Gimli, you know, Legolas, like, kind of like competition, like, hey, you know, no one tosses a dwarf kind of thing.
Nobody tosses a dwarf.
That's fun. It's fun thing, and it doesn't go to the, you know, absurdity level and stuff too. And I think that's a lot of thing I really like about this characters. We do, as we're talking about, have characters that have all different backgrounds. They're all different, and this movie does a good job of establishing, you know, like Gimli, like talking about, you know, his, you know, how proud he is of being a dwarf. And, you know, even when, you know, they're going in the mines of Moria and stuff, you know, he is like so excited, like, oh, you're gonna see, you know, the great wonders of the dwarfs and stuff. And, you know, you get a bit with like Legolas and, you know, the elves and stuff too. We get these different things that help build up these characters, but they're fun.
Yeah, they are. But, you know, I like that Gimli and Merry and Pippin are basically the comedy relief. And so often the comedy relief in more modern movies, man, they go overboard. You know, recently mentioned how I don't like what they did with C-3PO in anything except for the original trilogy. In the original trilogy, he's kind of the comedy relief for all of the other characters. Maybe a little bit of Chewie. But you know, mostly C-3PO. But they didn't go overboard. Same thing with Gimli. Same thing with, you know, Merry and Pip. They are the fun, interesting characters. Not that other characters aren't interesting. They're all super interesting. But, you know, they're the ones that keep you entertained, basically, while all the serious stuff is going on. Aragorn's got to do his, you know, his brooding, and Boromir's got to do his, you know, is it going to corrupt him? Isn't it going to corrupt him? You know, thing. Legolas is mostly just level-headed. You know, he's the, like, I'm going to outlive all of you. Don't really care, basically. Yeah, so, like I said, they all have their own thing going on. And then there's Gandalf. The one who knows the most about everything is like, really, really worried, but trying to not show how worried he is. So, the characters are so well written.
Yep. Especially, like, you know, Aragorn, too, because it's kind of a different take. We know very little about Strider and stuff when we see him. He is that mysterious guy. He's a guy that we see, you know, first get, like, the Pranciponi and stuff with just the thing, and, the smoke coming out and stuff. He's that mysterious character. As, you know, we go on, we learn a bit more about him. Like, you know, we see that, you know, he knows stuff about, like, the elves and stuff. And then when we actually get to Rivendell, we actually find out that Aragorn has a bigger backstory and has a bigger role to kind of play. And I think it also goes, like, the only other human that we really see in this, you know, Boromir and stuff too, we kind of see how they're different, how Aragorn's different, and how it, but, you know, generally they're kin. They're, you know, we learn from this, you know, they're from, you know, the same place, basically. Different time, kind of.
Different time, different place. You know, they're both humans.
Humans.
That's the thing. In this world of dwarves and hobbits and elves and wizards, they're humans. They're men, basically. Yeah. And that's kind of the way Aragorn sees it. But the way Boromir sees it is, you know, almost usurper, basically. Like, but he doesn't even really know about Aragorn's, like, claim at this point. He's just like, you know, he looks at it as he's Gondor and Aragorn's not Gondor, basically. So yeah, they're interesting characters, though. I mean, just, you know, they're not really there for us to latch onto, though. That's Frodo. That's Frodo and Sam, basically.
Well, like I said, there's the ones that you can really kind of relate to a little bit.
If you were there, how confused would you be? This confused. He's just as confused as Sam.
Nothing important. That is, I heard a good deal about a ring and a Dark Lord and something about the end of the world, but please, Mr. Gandalf, sir, don't hurt me.
That's what I'm saying. It's fun. That's the main thing. I got it. The interaction stuff that we get between these characters stuff. It's fun.
All right. Now I do have to. If we're going to talk about characters, so there's one character that we've left auspiciously out. So you won't see this as much in the theatrical version. You will see it a lot more in the extended version. Is Gandalf's time that he spends with Saruman. There's a lot more there in the extended edition. To my recollection, anyways, it's the one I've seen the most. That actually helps really flesh out the plot and the characters. The wizards, like Gandalf the Grey, Saruman the White. You know, like, all right, so what kind of powers do they have? And then you get that scene where they are kind of fighting with each other when you find out that Saruman has become corrupted by Sauron. And, you know, so now you don't just have this, you know, tower with an eyeball who's the bad guy. It's like, there's a villain that's, you know, the flesh, and I can understand him, basically. He's a wizard, but I get it.
Yep.
Know? So there's a lot there with the wizards.
Yep. Well, that's the thing too, because this movie is about, you know, their quest to get to, you know, the place to get rid of the ring.
Yes.
And he's the one, you know, Saruman is the one that's putting the obstacles in their way along the time too. So yes, he does really work, even though he's not the big baddie eyeball or whatever in this.
the big daddy eyeball.
The big daddy eyeball. He is the one that's basically, you know, hurting our group or whatever.
And what's interesting, at least from the movie perspective, is, you know, Gandalf goes to ask for assistance, goes to ask for help. We need help. And it's at that point that Saruman knows the One Ring is has been found. He doesn't know before before Gandalf comes and tells him.
So the Ring of Power has been found.
All these long years, it was in the Shire, under my very nose.
One thing I really like about the characters in this movie too, and what especially this movie, is we start off of them being so different and stuff, and we really show like the struggles that they go through together. At the end to kind of come together. Even though they were not all together at the end, but you really especially get to see the strengthening of the relationship between Gimli, Legolas, and Aragorn and stuff in there. Even though Aragorn and Legolas maybe had some history in the past working together, but I think this movie does a good job help solidifying them as like a group.
Wait, you mean wouldn't that have just been easier to explain in an elevator scene instead of showing us all these things they did together? Like, couldn't they have just been walking and said, "Hey, remember all those?" Okay, I'm making fun of episode 2 again. I'm sorry. It's so easy. The epitome of telling and not showing. Lord of the Rings, Fellowship of the Ring does not do that. It does exactly the opposite.
Yep.
It's everything's there. You get to see it.
Yep.
It's very, very, very awesome. There's also one female character in this entire movie.
Two
Oh,
female. Well,
right.
Technically 3 if you count Rosie. There may be more, but yes, they are outnumbered.
They're outnumbered. Oh yeah. So then it's kind of goes with like the elf stuff, more or less. You get to, Galadriel, and she isn't. You don't think she's super important if you're just watching the movie, But then you kind of find out, like, hey, again, you mentioned it. Frodo's like, "I'll give you the ring. I don't want it," and she's like, "Oh, good, I passed the test," after her very freaky queen thing, So she ends up being important later, though. That's that's fun. Like, you kind of watch the Fellowship of the Ring, you don't know anything about it, and you watch this, and you're like, "Oh yeah, cool elf lady," and then she gives them gifts. Great. Probably the last we're ever going to hear of her, right?
Yep.
Nope.
Well, that's the thing too, because this movie kind of builds up as like this is the last we're gonna hear from her. Like the elves are leaving, and she's bidding them farewell on the rest of their quest kind of thing. Like I'm gonna go out, and after I pass the test, like you mentioned.
So, real cool. I like Galadriel. I like Cate Blanchett's portrayal of Galadriel. Man, she can float. I'm sure it's movie magic, but she walks. She doesn't bob at all. It's the same thing as Hela. You probably noticed.
Just something about her. All right, so like for genre, I mean, it's fantasy. Like
it's everything.
It is everything. Fantasy. But for fantasy, I think this is the movie that really helped define fantasy in like film for a while. Like a lot of movies come afterwards, like kind of how we talked about The Matrix a little bit, sci-fi action. But this one, I think, really everyone was anything that was fantasy was kind of like, well, how does it compare to Lord of the Rings?
Yeah. So yes, fantasy is clearly the primary genre that this is in. You got magic, you got wizards, you got orcs, and all of this crazy stuff going on, dwarfs, elves, blah blah blah. But I mean, if you go in looking for action, you're gonna get action. If you go in looking for drama, you're gonna get some drama, especially with the Aragorn storyline and the elves and everything. Like, hey, we're leaving. Adios. Who cares about Middle Earth anymore? There's drama there, basically. All of that stuff's great, but like I had mentioned, like the primary genre's fantasy, and it delivers on fantasy. In specific to my thoughts in sets. I mean, when you first see Rivendell, it's just glorious. The music's amazing when you first see it, and you just look at it and you're like, wow, you're like this is exactly how I imagine wood elves, basically. And then you see Lothlorien. Yeah, and I think that's the right way to say it. Someone in the comments will correct me, I'm sure. And you're just like, wow, that's completely different than than anything than you saw in Riverdale. And you see a little bit of the Shire, which is awesome. And you see a little bit, just a tiny bit, of Gondor. And that's men, and that's different. The only one you don't really see is like mines with like active mines, because then you get to Moria.
Yep.
But like it's not an active mine for reasons.
But I think that's one thing, like specifically talking about sets. We have all these different, races and stuff. And it's these sets and stuff that help, introduce us and help define them and look at that kind of thing. That's why it's so important, like you said, that, that Rivendell is like so much different than, woodland up in like the trees kind of thing. Like it's a different aesthetic and stuff too. Now, Hobbiton, or the Hobbits and stuff, the Shire could feel a little bit like, maybe.
But it's clearly fantasy.
Yeah, but it's clearly fantasy. Prancing Pony is probably the most like, it is like men and stuff in there.
Yeah,
so
men.
It's kind of like, coming together a little bit. But yeah, even like talking about men, like we do see Gondor, but not really. Not a whole lot of it. And it doesn't really give us, a lot of it. And I think it's because, we're human. So we basically kind of think of human. But when we're introducing elves and wizards and dwarfs and stuff and hobbits that aren't, they're half human, basically, kind of like half humans or whatever.
Yeah.
For Lord of the Rings stuff. So it's like we want to spend more time with those because that's how we're establishing, the fantasy aspects of this movie.
Yeah, that is one of the biggest things. That's exactly how we're establishing the fantasy aspects of this movie. And the same thing, like I mentioned with like the fight between the wizards, how we're establishing kind of what kind of magic is. It's not Harry Potter. They're not, they're not throwing like spells and wands with laser beams coming out or anything like that. It's not that kind of magic. It's fantasy magic, not magic. I don't, they're it's not really fantasy. Harry Potter's not fantasy exactly. It's maybe. I don't know. It's weird.
Yeah, it's kind of. I guess it's kind of like a different type of fantasy.
It's a different type of fantasy. Gonna eat those words later.
They're wizards. They're both wizards.
They're both wizards. Yeah, but like I said, all the genres.
Yep.
All right, so for me, I love music in film. And so often nowadays, it just goes kind of by the wayside. Even Dune, which I was really looking forward to, like the music works. It works well. But Lord of the Rings, you can listen to the soundtrack, and you're just like, oh, that is golden, I love the Lord of the Rings soundtrack, and it has such an impact on the film. In every single scene, something's going on, and the music is just helping what's going on. It's not just there in the background. It's omnipresent throughout the entire film. And aside of Gladiator and a couple of other movies, 2001, A Space Odyssey, where the music's very, very, very there. Lord of the Rings, that stood out for me. Like just not only the fantasy, like sets and everything and characters, but this music.
And kind of what we were talking about before about how like the sets help like build the different races. I think the music really does that job as well too. When you get kind of like
the Rivendell music's so different from the men's music. Yes.
And I think another thing that the music does really good in this is it helps build up the tension. I think in this movie, like especially when we have like we meet like the race and stuff. It builds like, it just adds that tension and then, I don't know what you want to say, the vocals and everything, the music, it like speeds up and gets, bigger as we're getting closer to that danger and stuff.
The first time you see a wraith and you're like, well, that's scary. But like the music when you see the wraith, and then
like, and even when we go into the Mines of Moria and we have like the drums, and the drums are just building as it's going on and stuff too. And adding kind of like the vocals to it as well. This movie does a really good job with the music in several different facets.
Yeah. And really, for me, didn't see that coming. It's not every day that a movie comes along and the music just nails it. What about you?
So this kind of goes in with like my first impressions and everything with it. Like, hey, this looks cool. There's some action that looks cool. Hey, this looks approachable. This looks grand scale. I did not expect the Lord of the Rings to have, the movies to have such of a big impact and still have the lasting appeal that it does, kind of thing. I really didn't think it was going to be this huge, fantasy phenomenon that we get a whole bunch of like copycat, almost like movies and different stuff too. I mean, it's one of those things like when you ask the people, talk about Star Wars, did you think it's going to be big? And, the actors are like, oh yeah, we all knew it was going to be big. I think some of the people that read the books were hoping that Lord of the Rings was going to be this big. And I think that's, those fans are really what has helped it. But I think, I didn't think it was going to have, the almost, like universally impact that it did.
Yeah, it's an interesting thing because it's now not just the Lord of the Rings, the trilogy, or the Fellowship of the Ring, this movie, which, primarily what we're talking about, but it's a franchise now.
Yep.
You got the Hobbit films. You got the upcoming Amazon series. So I know one person in particular, and you may know her because she's shown up in one of our reviews, who's not particularly excited about the Amazon series. It's just like, leave it alone.
Yep.
And I can kind of feel a little bit of that. Like the lasting appeal of this is because the Fellowship was done so well.
Yep.
The trilogy was just done so well. It was so well thought out, meticulously planned. The music is awesome, and it's just like almost that Ghostbusters trying capturing, lightning in a bottle. Mm-hmm. It's hard, basically.
And I give a lot of credit to this first movie. Like, we're specifically talking about this. I think it's because, the Fellowship was so well done, introducing us to the different things. Randall and I, and come back next year and we'll talk about, like, Two Towers and stuff or whatever.
Literally, come back next year.
But just talking about, like, this movie, I think this movie just had such, I didn't expect it to have such a big, impact to set this up and everything.
Yeah, that's true. I think it's a risk. Mm-hmm. What New Line Cinema did was just a huge risk. Hey, we're gonna do it, and we're gonna do all three of them back to back. Because what if Fellowship bombs? Then you've got these other two movies that you've invested a lot of time and money into, but Fellowship didn't. Fellowship did exactly what it needed to be that first part of a trilogy while standing alone. Very important. Alita Battle Angel. What is it with movie makers nowadays? Mm-hmm. We're gonna have sequels. Let's plan for sequels. Maybe make a good movie first.
Make the first one go.
Make the first movie good first. Fellowship of the Rings, no problem.
Yep. And it's interesting too because it wasn't like this movie was just made in its own thing. Like, well, if this does well, we'll do other movies. Like, this movie was, made with a trilogy, and I'm actually surprised, like, how good, like, this as a standalone movie, does, knowing that.
I yawned, I'm sorry. I yawned, I'm sorry.
Lord of the Rings, The Fellowship of the Ring, specifically, really enjoy this movie, still enjoy this movie. I mean, I think my sister has probably seen this movie more than I have because she watches Lord of the Rings movies every time they come up on TV. I don't know if she still does, but I was doing it for a while and stuff. There's just so much that works well. I mean, I talk about characters. I mean, it's fun. This movie is a fun movie. It's a good starter for our trilogy. There's a lot of stuff unanswered, that we're waiting, like, hey, we're going to learn more about different things and, the promise of, continuing on this journey. But this is such a good starter of introducing us to these different races and stuff, introducing us to these characters and actually have these characters build relationships on the screen in this first movie. I really enjoy, the Fellowship of the Ring, and it still holds up, 20 years later.
Yeah. The biggest thing is first part of a trilogy. And it does that job. You watch it and you enjoy the film. I enjoy the film, but you just sit there and know that there's other things, but they're not other things to bug you. Episode 7, looking at you. Everything Star Wars, Matt.
Everything Star Wars.
Everything Star Wars. You know, they're not left there to bug you. They're left there like, hey, we've answered everything we need to for this film. We'll get to the other stuff later. Just like we're going to get to the Two Towers later. You know, so for me, that's the biggest conclusion is I still love watching the movie. And I absolutely love how it simply nails the first part of a trilogy. Just like Star Wars and New Hope. Everything is Star Wars.
Everything is Star Wars.
But that's it for this year. We're not going to talk about the Two Towers until the release date of the Two Towers next year. It's 20th anniversary. So don't ask us. It's not happening.
But Randall and I, we do want to know what you guys think of the Fellowship of the Ring. What are some aspects of the movie that Randall and I didn't talk about that really stood out for you? Let us know in the comments below. Also, be sure to check out some of our other reviews. We have other flashback movie reviews. We have new movie reviews. Take a look at some TV shows, and we have deeper dive discussions.
But also remember to go check us out on Facebook if you haven't already. We post the day before on Facebook what's coming up next on YouTube. Also some other things from other fandoms. Maybe something for the Amazon Lord of the Rings series when it gets closer. Who knows? Who knows?
Oh, I get it. Don't be hasty.
But if you haven't got a Facebook, don't worry about it. Just put us on your schedule. We are posting new videos every Monday and Thursday. But for now, this is Randall and Matt with No Market Media. See everyone next time.
See ya next time on No Market Media. Please consider checking out some of our other videos.